Okay, we've got some heavyweight conversations here. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. Today I want to talk about a controversial subject, and there's some very heavy topics in here, so I'm going to try to be very mindful. I'm going to talk about the recent Conor McGregor court case scandal. Although it's not really that recent, it just kind of came to a conclusion, I suppose you could say, recently. There's been a lot of talk about this from a lot of different perspectives in the media, so I just want to address some of these topics. Before I get into this video, a few disclaimers. For one, like I say in all my videos, I don't know any of the people I'm talking about in this video. I don't know any of them personally. I don't know what they're like in their personal life. I'm simply going by public information that is available to everyone. And at the end of the day, none of the things I'm talking about in this video really are about the individuals that I'm using as examples in this video. It's really just about lessons that you can take from these public images and public personas. You can translate into your everyday life so you can have happier, healthier lives and relationships. I would also state that I'm not a journalist. I have done some research on this topic, but I'm not here to give you like a news journalistic breakdown of the situation. The details of court case, the details of this celebrity or any other celebrities, like, is not really that important. But these are just observations and things that I feel like I want people to be more mindful of and more aware of. When I started hearing about the Conor McGregor drama and this whole court case and everything that was going on, fully admit, I knew who he was. Like, I knew the name. I knew he was a big UFC fighter. I don't know a lot of UFC fighters, and I knew who he was. So like, he's obviously, I'm gonna take a guess, he's kind of like the John Cena of the UFC, maybe. Not trying to drag John Cena's name into a whole sexual assault case, which I will be referring to sexual assault as SA from now on and not using the R word and things like that. Not because I want to diminish the severity of it, and I really wish that we could just use those words because they are conversations that we need to talk about. Unfortunately, these social media gods like to censor that stuff and shut it down, so I'm going to try to be very mindful about the wording that I use. It's frustrating that I have to do that, unfortunately, but it's just the world we live in. But basically, I had no preconceived ideas about Conor McGregor other than the fact that he was like a UFC fighter. So I wasn't going into this story or anything with, like, you know, any assumptions about who he was as a person or anything. I did a little bit of research. I did not dive deeply into the court case and things like that, simply because a lot of it was just getting really disturbing. I'm gonna come at this story from a few different angles because there's a few different topics that I feel like really need to be discussed. Just a general summary is that Conor McGregor was on trial for a woman who was accusing him of SA, Nikita, who has been publicly fighting this court case. She's, you know, allowed herself to be, her name and her image to be seen in the public, so we know who the person is, and she has been accusing him of SA. She actually just won a civil case. Now, it is my understanding, and again, the internet sometimes gives you information that may or may not be fact-checked and may or may not be true, but this is just my understanding of from what I've heard. But it's my understanding that she has been trying to pursue this since 2018 when the incident happened. So it's not like she just waited all these years and then made this accusation. It's my understanding that she has been trying to fight this for many, many years. It's also my understanding that she tried to fight this in criminal court. It did not have sufficient evidence to be a criminal case, but she did have sufficient evidence to have it be a civil case. I'm not a lawyer. I was raised by a lawyer, but I'm not a legal expert, and I'm certainly not a legal expert on the Irish court system because this was a case that was happening in Ireland. But it's my understanding that she wanted this to be a criminal case, but the requirement of the burden of proof and evidence was not enough, which is not that uncommon in SA cases, which I'm going to get into in a minute. But she ended up trying it in civil court, which meant that, and I think there's different terminology for like guilty, not guilty, libel. There's different terminology here. I'm just trying to give people a backstory. My understanding, he was found guilty, libel, I'm not sure. Basically, there was sufficient evidence for the jury to find him guilty, libel, however you want to say it, of SAing her. He was required to pay her, I don't know what the translation was, but it was just over $200,000 in damages. Some people are calling it a cash grab because they're saying that, well, she took the money and didn't want to put him in jail. It's my understanding that she was trying to put him in jail. However, the burden of proof did not allow the case to qualify in a criminal court case. Unfortunately, that's not surprising in many of these cases. There's a lot of misconceptions about SA court cases. Many of them, because really, and again, I don't really know the Irish court system, but at least in the American court system, is that if you accuse someone of something, then you have the burden of of proof. Like, anyone can accuse anyone of anything, but if you do accuse someone of something, you have the burden of proving them to be guilty because they're innocent until proven guilty. So you have that burden of proof. Most, I would say probably the majority of SA cases, it tends to be a he said, she said situation. There's very often not witnesses. In some cases, even if there is evidence that there was some kind of a sexual encounter, there isn't necessarily evidence whether it was consensual or not consensual. Like, it is incredibly difficult for SA cases to meet the requirement of a burden of proof that something was actually like non-consensual, or sometimes that it even happened originally. My heart goes out to anybody who has had to deal with that kind of trauma. It does, and I don't want anything I say in this video to ever detract from that. If you have been through that trauma, or if God forbid you ever go through that trauma, my heart goes out to you. And I understand that people respond to that differently. Unfortunately, part of the problem is that we don't have a system set up where women can safely come forward, you know, right away when it's happened, which is the best time to gather evidence. It's the best time to get the burden of proof is when it's first happened. I can understand why people might not immediately want to report it. You've just been through trauma. You're afraid that people might blame you, which is a subject I'm going to get into in this video. There's so many different reasons why I can understand why women would not come forward right away. Unfortunately, coming forward right away, getting examined right away, reporting it right away is the best way for criminals to get convicted of these things. Again, it is unfortunate that I'm pretty sure there was, I don't remember the exact number, but it's a very high number. It's like over 90% of men who actually commit sexual crimes will never see one day behind bars, which is just heartbreaking. Now, a lot of people jump to false accusations or saying that this woman was just after a cash grab. Let me start off by saying that false accusations do happen, but let's also be real, because the court system is set up so anybody can accuse anybody of anything, but you have the burden of proof in showing evidence of this situation, that the reality is you're going to get people that are falsely accused of a lot of things. That's just the way, that's the nature of the system. It is what it is. In reality, you kind of have to have it like that, because you need to have a system where people feel like they can come forward if someone's committed a crime. In reality, when the way the system is set up, where you have to have the burden of proof, and the fact that in many of these SA cases, it's very difficult to have proof because a lot of it is there's no witnesses. In a lot of cases, there's minimal evidence, and there's a lot of he said, she said aspects to this. Because the burden of proof is quite difficult in these cases, it's actually much more in favor in the court system of a man who's being accused of this actually getting away with it. The court of public opinion is different. The vast majority of men, even who are being accused of SA, whether they're guilty or innocent, are not going to be convicted of it. A woman accusing a man of this and going to court, whether he's found guilty or innocent, he will probably have a mark on him, but that is public opinion. And that's not really something that the court system is necessarily set up for. That's our assumption. So if a woman does accuse a man of something, whatever the actual verdict is, there's probably always going to be a stigma over his head. And that's the court of public opinion. I personally don't think that dealing with that in the court system, I've seen a lot of men say that like women should be punished for falsely accusing a man, and there's a lot of reasons why that can't happen, or it shouldn't happen, and I'm going to explain why. Now first, I don't think that false accusations are acceptable or appropriate, because they actually hurt victims. Because anytime that there is a false accusation that comes about, it just makes society more distrustful of people who are actual victims. So I'm not endorsing false accusations, but there's a lot of reasons why we can't have punishment for people who falsely accuse someone of something. First of all, if you're sitting there and arguing that there should be a harsher punishment for people who falsely accuse someone of a crime than people are getting for actually committing the crime, which is kind of what people are saying. There's a lot of men who are using the argument that if a woman falsely accuses a man of SA, that she should be really harshly punished, but they're not fighting for men who actually commit SA to be punished that harshly. That's a problem. Seeing as though statistically speaking, it is vastly more likely that a woman is going to be sexually assaulted than a man will ever have to worry about being falsely accused of being sexually assaulted. I really think as a society, if you're worried about false accusations, you're worried about the wrong problem, because that's so uncommon, especially in relation to the people who are actually committing a crime. I'm not diminishing that false accusations are not harmful. They're especially harmful to people who are actually victims. Unfortunately, it's really not common enough for us to, as a society, really freak out about that as much. And I'm going to get into a little bit about that in a minute. But the concern really should be on protecting the people who are actually victims of this and making sure that the people who are actually committing these crimes are being punished to the full extent of the law, which isn't happening statistically speaking. So there are not like massive numbers of men who are in jail because they've been falsely accused of SA. In fact, there's a lot more men who have actually committed that crime walking around free because there isn't enough proof to put them behind bars. And that's the bigger concern. Gotta be honest with you, as a society, when it comes to the concept of false accusations. If you are a man with some kind of status, money, power, influence, are you more likely to be a target for false accusations? Probably, yeah. But not every man that's in power is getting accused of crimes like SA. In reality, the vast majority of women who are accusing men of SA, whether it be it really happened or whether it be false accusations, most of these men have had sexual encounters with the women that are accusing them. And the vast majority of the time, it becomes a, was it consensual? Was it not consensual? And that could get into a whole conversation about consent, but just focused on this. The reality is, if men were really that concerned with false accusations, they would operate very differently in the world, let's be honest. Because it's incredibly rare, and I know there's probably gonna be somebody that's gonna come in the comments and tell me, like, I knew a guy who never met this woman, and then this woman all of a sudden accused him of this or whatever. I'm not saying that it never happens, but it is incredibly rare and not something that most men really need to concern themselves with. It's one of those situations where, like, if it's a bright sunny day and you're just like walking around in the street, like, are you constantly terrified of lightning striking you? Probably not. But if you go out into a thunderstorm and there's lightning everywhere and you're the tallest thing in a big open field and you get struck by lightning, okay, not shocking, right? Because you weren't taking precautions. It's a similar situation with men who are getting falsely accused. Most of the men who are getting accused of these crimes are men who have put themselves in situations where, you know, there's gray area there. They've put themselves in situations where they're having sexual encounters with women they don't know. And I'm not saying that all these women are falsely accusing these men, but most of these men put themselves in situations with women that they didn't know if they could trust. And then if the woman does falsely accuse him, he all of a sudden plays the victim. Interestingly enough, when women arguably are irresponsible and conduct themselves in a way where they put themselves in a situation where they are vulnerable to a man assaulting them, we expect women to be held accountable for, well, she shouldn't have been dressed like that, she shouldn't have been alone with him, and she shouldn't have done this, and she shouldn't have done that. Whereas when men put themselves in a situation where they have, say, a sexual encounter with a woman that they don't really know, and then the woman turns around and accuses him of SA, even if she is falsely accusing him and she's just doing it to get his money or to get fame or something like that, we don't hold him accountable for putting himself in that situation. We're not like, hey, you know what? Maybe you didn't want to be falsely accused of a crime, but maybe you were dressed like you wanted to be falsely accused of a crime. Or, you know, you said you didn't want to be falsely accused, but your eyes kind of said you did want to be falsely accused. Well, what were you doing alone in a hotel room with a woman who you didn't know well enough to know if she was going to falsely accuse you or not? Like, we never actually hold men to that standard. But if a woman does actually get SA'd, we say all of those things about her. We hold the responsibility of men's actions on her, but we don't hold men to the same standard of responsibility if something negative happens to him because he's put himself in that situation. The reality is that men are looking for consequence-free sex. Women, for the most part, understand there is no such thing as consequence-free sex for us. It just doesn't exist. Women always have consequences. We're more vulnerable physically. We run the risk of pregnancy. Women are more susceptible to sexually transmitted diseases. Women are always more vulnerable in these situations, yet we are held to a different level of accountability. And if men do not want to put themselves in a situation where they're going to potentially have their lives ruined by someone, they can choose to be more mindful of who they have these encounters with, because most men are not getting falsely accused of random women on the street. They're being accused by women they have had a sexual encounter with, and this woman is saying that it was not consensual, and the man is saying that it was consensual, and then it becomes a he said, she said situation. And one of the reasons why men are not more cautious is because they're not really that afraid of false accusations. They'll complain about them, but they understand that in the court of law, when it actually comes down to the burden of proof and it becomes a he said, she said situation, that more often than not, there will not be enough evidence for him to actually get convicted. And if you are a man with a whole lot of money, throwing some money at the problem is probably not anything to them. But the woman may have to live with that for the rest of her life. At the end of the day, I'm all for teaching women that they need to protect themselves. I don't ascribe to this idea of like we should just teach men not to be violent against women and we shouldn't be having to teach women to protect themselves. In a perfect world, yes. In a perfect world, a woman wouldn't be susceptible to this stuff. In a perfect world, women wouldn't have to protect themselves against bad people. Unfortunately, it's just not the world we live in. So I'm always the first one to tell women, like, don't go somewhere alone with a man that you don't know. You do, unfortunately, have to be mindful of how you dress. Although I will tell you, I had an instance, not an actual like essay instance, but years ago, one of the scariest experiences of my life was actually getting locked out of a 24-hour parking garage late at night in the city. I was like stuck outside. I couldn't get to my car before the days of like Uber and things like that. So I'm on my cell phone. It's the middle of winter. I'm wearing like a winter coat and winter boots and like jeans and everything. I'm covered up like as much as possible, but I'm like pacing up and down because I'm trying to stay warm and I'm trying to get on my phone to see like how I can figure out how to get home and things like that. 5 different guys pulled over and thought I was a hooker. And I was fully clothed head to toe. So the idea that it's like, oh, it's what you're wearing, I don't buy that. But in the same way that I would always tell women that they have to be safe and they have to protect themselves, in that same way, I think that, well, first of all, we should have a message that men should be protecting women, and that goes into another conversation I'm going to get into about masculine energy and masculinity and things like that. However, if men are actually concerned with protecting themselves, then they should also be very mindful about who they're associating with and who they have these encounters with. But the reality is that even though, yes, a man being accused of something, and especially if it's not true, a false accusation could absolutely hurt a man's life. Most men know that even if it is true and they're being accused of something, that they probably won't ever see one day in jail. If they actually were afraid of that, like truly, and not just that they wanted to whine and complain about it and play the victims, they would conduct themselves in a different manner. They would not just be having random sexual encounters with women they didn't know and couldn't trust. I mean, it goes to the same, I mean, obviously this essay is one thing, but it goes the same to men who believe that they're going to be targets for women, like baby trapping them and things like that. At the end of the day, if you as a man are worried about that, don't have a sexual encounter with a woman that you don't know, that you think might do that to you. I mean, if you're gonna hold women to a certain standard of accountability and protecting themselves, then men should be held to that same standard. If you think that you have something to lose, you should have to be careful of that as well. If you think that you're gonna, lose your reputation, if you think that you're gonna lose money, then you need to be more careful about how you conduct yourself. And if you're gonna hold that standard for women and tell women that they need to carry themselves differently or act differently, or that, they should do something differently to protect themselves, then you as a man should do the same thing. Now, the reality is, I don't know the whole situation with the Conor McGregor and Nikita situation. It's my understanding that Conor McGregor has admitted to having a sexual encounter with this woman, but he's arguing it was consensual. She's arguing it was not consensual. That does line up, at least, with the way that the case turned out, because at the end of the day, the fact, like, for it to be a criminal case, you would have to prove that this was non-consensual. That's really a he said, she said situation, and it would be really difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this was non-consensual. In a civil case, you would really just have to prove damages, and it's my understanding that she did have to seek medical attention, that she did have injuries. And it's my understanding that in that situation, whether it was consensual or not consensual, she obviously was harmed in the situation. So that is likely, and again, I have not dived super deep into this case because it was getting too graphic and I really couldn't handle it. But again, that does make sense. It's also my understanding, and I don't know this 100%, that she was offered like $1 million as like shut up money initially, and she ended up with, probably, years and years of legal fees and stuff, and, years of drama, and she's getting like just over $200,000. If that is true, and if my facts are correct, which I'm not 100% sure that those facts are correct, but if they are, it's my understanding that she's not looking for the quick cash grab. She probably would have taken that initially. It's my thinking that she actually wanted this to come out. After doing a little bit of research, there's at least 3 or 4, I believe, other women who have accused him of SA. Those cases all kind of seem to just go away. Now, could these women all be looking for a payout and just making the accusation because they hear they can get a payout? It's possible. I don't know. I don't know the details of these cases. That said, when you actually look at the overall picture of Conor McGregor's actions and history, he does have a pretty severe history of violence. And I'm not just talking about career-wise, but it seems like in his personal life, he has a pretty serious history of violence, like out of the ring. So the idea that he would actually be violent with women is not a huge stretch. So it's not like you have this very like wholesome guy who is now randomly getting accused by women because he has money. You have someone who has a pretty serious history of violence, who has quite a few women who accuse him of SA, and then it goes away, which leads you to believe that they're probably being paid off. And they're probably being paid off, my guess is possibly because there's some truth to it. If you think about it, and one of the reasons why I don't necessarily think that this situation with Nikita Hand is a cash grab. Again, I don't know the details. I don't know this person. I don't know any of these people, but I'm looking at the situation from an outsider's perspective. When a woman accuses a man of SA, there is a stigma over his head, but the backlash that women get, and there are certain groups that will definitely support them and lift them up and be there for them for sure, but overall in the public, women will get brutally torn apart in the media. There was actually, I remember a guy talking about an instance where he had a female friend who had said that she had been SA'd in college, and he said, why didn't you come forward? And she said, because my entire sex life would have been public information. There is something to that. Like, if a woman does come forward, then her entire personal life and her entire sexual history then becomes a topic of conversation for the world. And you know, some people don't care, and there's some women who put their sexual history out there for the world, and some women wouldn't care, but the vast majority of women don't want their entire, you know, sexual history or sexual conduct all public for the world to see. In fact, for many women, that's one of their biggest fears. And particularly in this case with the Nikita Hand, the way that Conor McGregor fans are just absolutely tearing her to shreds publicly, like the awful things that they are saying about this woman. Now, there are some women who might be so desperate for money and desperate for a payout that they can just completely block that stuff out. But I gotta be honest, like, being that publicly scrutinized and ridiculed and torn apart, or coming forward and saying you're a victim, whether you believe she is or not, like that kind of public humiliation for, you know, $200,000, I gotta say that's a pretty strange risk-reward analysis. Now, she may have other options of maybe writing a book or things like that or something like that, you know, I don't know. But this stigma is not gonna ruin his career. He's still gonna have a perfectly fine career. Mike Tyson was actually convicted, has, you know, managed to come back and have a phenomenal career. So this is not gonna harm him. In some cases, like in some careers and in some fields, would this kind of accusation hurt a guy? Yeah. But in things like, you know, Conor McGregor's field or very violent sports or things like that, it's probably not going to hurt him. He's made his money. He probably will still continue to make money. It's really not even going to be, it'll just be a blip on his record. He's not going to be that negatively affected by it. But she's going to have this association held over her head for the rest of her life. I mean, again, and I'm not trying to diminish anything she's been through, and I'm not trying to dismiss anything that she's dealt with, but I am saying that what she's subjected herself to publicly does not seem worth it for the payout. At least it wouldn't be for most people. Maybe she's that desperate for money, or maybe she thought she'd get more money. I don't know. Again, I'm just trying to look at this objectively. I'm pretty sure that it's been testified in court from some of the people that were, you know, doctors and people that examined her and stuff. She's been through trauma. I don't think there's any question about that. There is the question of consent, I'm sure, but the fact that people are literally picking apart everything about her, and she's subjected herself to this public humiliation, and that's something that we don't really look at. When men complain about men having the stigma or having consequences of being falsely accused, women who accuse men of SA are very often subjected to horrific scrutiny. They're being subjected to mass humiliation. Are there going to be certain groups who are going to support women who come forward? Yes, there are. But generally speaking, and especially the more famous and the more beloved the man is that they're accusing, the more scrutiny that these women are going to get. And so it's not like a woman coming forward and accusing a man doesn't ever have any kind of stigma or any kind of consequence for her. Whether it's true, whether it's not true, like, women are still going to be subjected to a lot of public humiliation. The things that people are saying about her, I think, are horrific. And I've already touched on the idea of people starting to pick apart, like, how she conducted herself. The fact that she supposedly went to, I guess, a hotel room with him. Again, I don't know the specific details. There's no choice that a woman makes that allows someone to assault her. Are there choices that a woman can make that will make her more vulnerable to SA? Yes, but nothing that she does and none of those choices actually make it okay for someone to SA you. I used the example before, like, to take the kind of like sexual aspect out of it. I used the example of, say for example, you're walking around a neighborhood that you know is a terrible neighborhood, like, you know it's a crime-riddled neighborhood, and you've got like your wallet out and you've got money hanging out and you're just like waving it around like, look at all the money I have, and then you get robbed. It's safe for you to look back on that situation and say, you know what? I should have been smarter. I shouldn't have been waving my money around, and I should have been more careful, and I should have protected myself because I knew that was a bad situation and I knew I shouldn't have walked into that situation, and that's all valid. However, the person that robbed you is still a criminal. They still took something that wasn't theirs, and they're still a criminal, and they should still be held accountable for what they did. It's them that committed the crime. Your irresponsibility is something that's fair to look at within yourself so that you don't put yourself in a bad situation. However, it does not excuse someone from committing a crime, point blank, period. So yeah, is it fair to say to women, hey, you know what? Maybe don't go alone to a hotel room with a man that you don't know? Yes, I say that all the time. I tell women all the time, when you're dealing with men, pretend you're in a horror movie and you're watching, you know, you're watching the screen in a horror movie, and like there's like a woman who's about to open the door, and like, you know, there's danger on the other side of the door, but she's like just about to open the door like it's no big deal, and you're like screaming like, don't go in there. Every time I hear a woman that like goes to a man's hotel room alone or goes to his apartment alone or something like that, like I literally want to scream and be like, oh my god, don't go in there. Like, it's like a horror movie to me. That said, it doesn't excuse a man's behavior when she does do that. It doesn't excuse the crime that a man commits. Just because a woman allows herself to be vulnerable does not excuse the crime. That said, it is still valid to tell women that they need to be more careful. It's absolutely, and as I said before, it's valid to tell men to be more careful. If you feel like you have something to lose, then you should be protecting that as well. There's also a misconception that I think a lot of people have, unfortunately, and I think this is like a huge reflection on the lack of education that people have around, I would say, sex education, but also human psychology and things like that. There's a lot of false ideas about SA. I mean, some of it is just a lack of education. Some of it, I think, is actually like corn culture, the way that our minds have been demented about sexuality. However, there are a lot of misunderstandings about SA that I think need to be discussed. For one, a man committing SA is not because he's like so unbelievably attracted to a woman that he just cannot control himself and he just has to have her because she's just so desirable and so attractive. That's not what that is. It's not being filled with lust. That's not what that is. It's an act of control and violence. A man who is going to, and I'm talking about men who actually are committing sexual assault. I'm not talking about gray areas. I'm not talking about false accusations. I'm not talking about misunderstandings as far as consent, which those do happen. I'm talking about men who actually are committing SA, who are actually forcing themselves on women who are saying no. That is control and violence. That is not about being overcome with lust. This is not me just making this up, and this is not like you just don't understand men. No, this is like actual human psychology, okay? This is not about being overcome with sexual attraction. Men, straight men, will SA other men when they're in prison. They will SA elderly women, children. Like, this is not just about some woman looks hot and the guy's like, I have to have her, and he just forces himself on her. It's much more often a matter of control and violence. Most men are not SAing women just because they're hot. They're SAing women out of a need for control. So the woman's physical appearance means nothing. Again, men will sexually assault, you know, elderly women, children, other men, animals, if they feel a need for control and they have a propensity for violence. And I have a video too about this that goes into more detail, but if you are someone who is, I would say, a very extreme narcissist, for sure a sociopath or psychopath, any of those personality disorders where you don't have empathy, you tend to not humanize people or see the empathy in other living things. So you will very often ignore the other person's safety, consent, or anything just for your own gratification. And I have a whole video where I dive into that deeper. I'll link that to this one. I'm not going to dive into that here, but a woman's physical appearance has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not she's susceptible to this stuff. In fact, very often there are men who do have a propensity for violence against women who will specifically target women who may, and I'm not trying to diminish women, but like who may not be considered conventionally attractive in society because they tend to be more insecure, and also because they know if this woman comes forward that the world is then going to trash her and bash her appearance, and it's another level of humiliation that gives this guy a sense of power. And if a guy has like control issues, ego issues, a propensity for violence, things like that, and a woman who is maybe not like a supermodel, so to speak, does turn him down, that can also aggravate his ego enough for him to then attack back with violence. A woman's physical appearance means nothing. It means nothing in these situations. So these guys that decide that they want to attack a woman, any woman who is accusing a man of SA and wants to attack her physical appearance, clearly knows nothing about the psychology behind these acts of violence. I also want to state that, look, Conor McGregor is in a very violent field. He's in the UFC, it's fighting. Most sports have some level of violence to them. Some are obviously more violent than others. You know, things like mixed martial arts, boxing, even football to a certain extent, that tend to be like heavy contact sports that have a propensity for violence. There are some people who are drawn to those sports and that's their sort of outlet for aggression, and you know, they're in those sports because of the physical prowess. They probably, you know, we all have some level of violence within us, but they use that sport to channel their violence, but in their personal life they're not violent against other people. They know how to channel that violence when it's appropriate and when to not do that. So I'm not saying that everybody that is involved in a violent sport is automatically going to be violent in their personal life. That said, if someone does have a propensity for violence just in life and they don't really have a good sense of control over that violence, or you know, they just have like a really strong propensity for violence all the time, it is more likely that they're going to be drawn to fields, you know, whether it be career or hobbies or something where being violent is more acceptable. So the idea that there are people that are in these sort of violent sports that are more likely to be violent in their personal life is not that shocking. It's not a guarantee, and I'm sure that there are plenty of people who are in these violent sports that don't channel that into their personal lives, but it's also not surprising that you would see people who are drawn to those sports who would be more violent in their personal lives. And it does seem, just on the basic surface level research that I've seen about Conor McGregor, he has a very serious propensity for violence, it seems, in and outside the ring. So that doesn't automatically make him guilty of anything, but when you see a pattern of violence in someone, it's pretty likely that you're going to find violence in every area of their life, because it seems like Conor McGregor has been violent in many other areas. He's been accused of violence against women often, but he's been accused of violence against other men, property destruction, very erratic driving, which there's a message that's interesting. It's not something I ever thought of, but I've seen more people talking about this, about like telling women that if you're with a man who has a tendency to drive very dangerously, he's more likely to be violent against you in your personal life at some point. I gotta be honest with you, it makes sense, because in order to drive very dangerously, I mean, it does show a sense of like irresponsibility for sure and erratic behavior, but it also shows a serious lack of, well, empathy and humanity for not only, you know, the people that you're with in the car, but other people that are driving, because you know that you're putting the people in your car and the people in the world at risk. So, I mean, I'm not saying that that's necessarily a guarantee, but you know, it is something to keep in mind. And I really do hope that women that are listening to this keep some of these things in mind, that if a man does have a history of violence that you're seeing in his personal life, it's one thing if he maybe is in a violent field, but he doesn't have any indications or history of violence in his personal life. That's one thing. But if he is in a violent field and he is showing signs of violence in his personal life, major red flag that you got to look out for. Because it's showing signs that he doesn't know how to like leave that in the ring, or, you know, leave that at work, and how to channel that in a healthy way in his personal life. And that's something, because women are incredibly vulnerable, that's something you really need to pay attention to. There are a lot of men who are defending Conor McGregor, and I have a lot of videos touching on this topic about like healthy versus unhealthy masculine energy, and about, you know, the lack of masculine leadership and things like that. So I have a lot of other videos on this content, but I want to touch on this a little bit because I think that there's a lot of misleading information out there for men about what being masculine actually is. I know I'm going to get the men that are going to say things like, you're a woman, what right do you have to tell men how to be masculine? Here's the thing. First of all, women have women's intuition, a heightened sense of reading people, because as women, it's actually our job to determine whether or not a man is in healthy masculine energy or unhealthy masculine energy. It's our job to determine whether or not a man is safe. Are women always great at it? No. I find it very interesting that more often than not, when a lot of these situations happen where women are vulnerable, there's usually some kind of substance abuse going on, which is actually going to inhibit a woman's ability to sense whether or not a man is safe or not safe, which is very often why men give women these substances, so that these women can't determine whether or not a man is safe or unsafe, which is why I'm a big proponent in not using drugs and alcohol, because it will diminish your ability to read people. For men who want to be like, well, how do you as a woman know if a man's masculine? Well, that's our job. Like, we have to. It's a survival skill for women to be able to determine whether or not a man is masculine. I've said this before in other videos. I don't really think that women can like teach men or initiate men into their masculinity. Other men have to do that. Unfortunately, and I've mentioned this in a lot of other videos too, don't have initiation processes to teach men how to go from boys to men. Some of it is a lack of father figures, but I think it's just a lack of healthy masculine role models in society in general. If you want to look more into this, I highly recommend the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. It goes into this much deeper, and I have a lot of other videos talking about this. There's a lot of guys out there who will talk about being like an alpha, or that think that being masculine is sort of like just pushing their weight around and beating people up and things like that. And then a lot of guys who will be like, oh, how is you as a woman going to determine what's masculine? Well, we know what's masculine and what's not masculine. Like, it's not like I'm not sitting here and just making up what it means to be masculine. We inherently know in our society what masculinity is and what it isn't. We know what's healthy and we know what's not. I know a lot of guys don't like the term toxic masculinity because they're like, masculinity isn't toxic. No, healthy masculinity isn't toxic. However, toxic masculinity is when men exhibit toxic behaviors in the false name of being masculine. So if you as a man are violent against women, when women are more vulnerable than men, if you're violent against women, you are exhibiting toxic behavior under the false assumption that you're making yourself more of a man by beating up somebody who is weaker than you. And that's toxic masculinity. When you're exhibiting toxic behavior because it's giving you a false sense of masculinity, when it's actually a sign that you're actually a weak man. Healthy masculinity doesn't do that. Healthy masculinity is, you may need to be violent, but you're violent to protect. Like, if somebody is trying to harm you or your family and you have to be violent against them to protect, that's healthy masculinity. If you just see someone and are like, you know what, I'm just gonna beat up on this person because it's gonna make me feel better about myself, that is unhealthy masculinity. That's toxic masculinity, wounded masculinity, whatever it is you wanna call it. That's not being masculine. That's just being an ass, plain and simple. If you're a man who's violent against women, and again, I've said this in other videos, and I'm not going to get into this argument. I don't care what the woman did. I really don't. I don't care if the woman tried to beat the crap out of you. If you hit a woman, you're an ass. Women are always more vulnerable. A man hitting a woman is always more serious than a woman hitting a man in every single instance. And I'm not going to get into a debate about this because it's not questionable. It just is what it is. Men and women are different. But if you're a man and you are violent against women or children, you are not in healthy masculine energy. And the thing is that like when guys say things like, well, who are you to say what's masculine? We know what's masculine in our society. It's not a big secret, okay? It's every superhero movie that you see. Like, there's a hero and there's a villain. The hero is in healthy masculine energy. The hero is trying to protect. He's fighting for a greater good, oftentimes at the sacrifice of himself, of his life, of his own safety, because he's putting that aside because he's fighting for something greater than himself. He's fighting to protect. He operates with ethics, discipline. Like, we know who the hero is in a movie. The villain is usually operating out of ego, harming other people, abuse, acting out of his own selfish interests and things like that, and it's just violent to abuse. Every superhero movie that's the storyline. I always use the movie 300 with King Unitas against Xerxes. Like, we know who the good guy is and we know who the bad guy is. Unfortunately, too many men in our society are trying to be the villain and calling that masculine. You want to be the hero, not the villain. That's the deal. And I'm not just making this up. Like, I'm not just some woman who's just like making up this story. There's superhero movies about it. I highly recommend you look into the work of Joseph Campbell. He has books and he has a whole special from a while ago, but I've watched it a few times. It's fascinating, about like a hero's journey and talking about being a hero and men being heroes. When you have men that are going around and just like randomly assaulting people, particularly randomly assaulting women, that's not a hero. That's an abuser. It's a different thing. But unfortunately, in our current society, we're putting villains up on pedestals. You know, people like Conor McGregor, the Andrew Tates of the world, like, we're putting these people up on pedestals and we're actually idealizing the villain, and we're not actually giving the heroes enough credit. And there's also not enough heroes in the world, unfortunately, which I would say is like healthy masculine men and healthy masculine leadership to help guide boys into being the hero, into being the healthy masculine man. So a lot of these men are staying in this like perpetual like man-child, king baby, immature adolescent personality, and then they're growing up and they're becoming these sort of violent villains. I think that's a real problem we have in our society, and the fact that we are glamorizing these men who are not role models, and we need more men who are healthy masculine role models. And I have to be honest, I think to a certain extent, and this is where I'm going to give a little bit of empathy to some of the men out there who are defending the Conor McGregors and the Andrew Tates of the world. I'm going to give them a little bit of empathy here, is that I think a lot of these guys are so desperate for a father figure or a role model or some man in their life they can look up to, and there's such a shortage of that. And I think when you have a shortage of something that is so necessary in our society, which healthy male role models are a necessity, and when you have a lack of that, it leaves an opening for some really bad people to fill that spot. You know, they say in psychology that there's like one of the most difficult days in a man's life is when he realizes his father is imperfect. And a lot of times boys will fight that because they want to believe that their father is, you know, this sort of superhero. And I think a lot of, you know, boys, young men, even grown men, are putting some of these men who are, they're villains, they're bad guys, in that kind of like surrogate father figure role, or like that masculine leadership role, when these men are not leaders, they're not role models in any way. When it becomes like public information how bad these guys are, there's a lot of men who just like latch onto like, no, I want to believe that this guy is a good guy because I want him to be my hero. When he's not a hero, he's the villain. A lot of guys just can't accept that, and I think that's why you see a lot of guys who are defending these guys. Now, I'm not trying to say the way that these guys are doing it is healthy by any means, but I think that that's some of the reason why it's happening. And I think we need more. We definitely have a society where we need more healthy masculine role models for boys and even for men nowadays, because there's a lot of men who've lost their way, and a lot of men who are just looking up to the wrong people, emulating the wrong people. I'm not saying that women aren't doing that too. I mean, I know a lot of guys are going to throw out like, what about women that are following the Kardashians? And I'm not saying that there aren't bad role models for women. Right now, the men that a lot of boys and men are emulating are some really bad people. And we need more good people that men are looking up to. I do think there's also a lot of men in the world who want to believe that if they got enough money, power, success, if they were good looking enough, if they were muscular enough, if they were, you know, confident enough, cocky enough, or whatever, that they can do whatever they want and there's no consequences for it. I think a lot of men want to believe that. Unfortunately, that's true for some guys. It shouldn't be. But in the real world, generally speaking, bad behavior will catch up with you. And I think that's why a lot of guys fight it when that does happen. When you have somebody like a Conor McGregor who has such a history of violence, and then he ends up getting a court case that does hold him to some extent accountable. I don't think it's accountable as it probably should have, but when things do catch up with these guys, I think there's a lot of guys that get really angry because they want to believe that if a man gets to a certain level that he can do whatever he wants. And it really shouldn't be that way. I mean, that's not how the world is, because you're actually, if you get to a point where you're actually harming other people, I mean, you should be held accountable for that. Just dove way into a lot of other topics, and I was gonna focus a little bit more on Conor McGregor and Dee Devlin, who is his longtime longtime girlfriend, I guess now fiance. A lot of people keep referring to her as his wife. They are not legally married. They've been engaged, I believe, for 4 years. I think they've been together for 16 years. I could be wrong about the actual numbers when it comes to that, but they've been together for a very long time. They've been engaged for a long time. They have, I believe, 4 kids together. I've been hearing rumors that he may have some other kids with other people. I think none that have been officially confirmed, just some that are rumors. Apparently, there's a lot of evidence that he's been sleeping with other people. And I know there's going to be people being like, well, maybe she knows, and maybe they're polyamorous or whatever. I don't know that. However, I mentioned this in my video that I talked about with JD and Usha Vance. You know, women glow when they're loved properly. And Dee Devlin is a beautiful woman. I was actually shocked when I looked up how old she is. She looks very young for her age, and she's a beautiful woman. And granted, the pictures of her currently, like when she's walking out of court where her husband is basically just lost a lawsuit with a woman accusing him of SA, which I'm sure was very stressful for her, and I'm sure very embarrassing for her. And of course, she's gonna look stressed. She's not gonna look happy. But just generally speaking, in a lot of the just video and footage and stuff I've seen of her, she looks not happy. and I don't blame her, considering everything that we kind of do know publicly about their situation. There's some people that are saying that she's just staying with him for the money, and I suppose that's possibly true. You know, some people are theorizing that she's with him because she's afraid to leave him. She's also got 4 kids with him, so just walking away is, you know, difficult, like even when you have money. And I don't really know enough about her and their situation to actually say like why she's staying with him. And I don't like to make like these like assumptions, like when people are like, she's just with him for money. I don't know what kind of person she is. So, you know, maybe she is, maybe she isn't. I don't know. It's my understanding that she's, you know, she was with him when he had nothing, and that, you know, she was doing a lot, like she was waitressing and things to help support them, you know, while he was getting his career going and things like that. I wish this wasn't true, but unfortunately, if you build with a man and you're with a man when he has nothing and you help him build, it rarely ever works out well for you in the end. And I wish that wasn't true. Like in a perfect world, if a woman is there for a man when he's struggling and he does make something of himself, that they can enjoy that success together. That would be the perfect world. And I'm not saying that never happens, but unfortunately too often, that's not the way it goes. And I've seen it time and time again. I've seen it with celebrities. I mean, I think we've all seen it with, you know, people who are, you know, public figures, but I've seen this personally, like just in life in general. You know, I was in the entertainment business for a while, so I've seen it with like other, you know, people I've been around, you know, other couples and things like that. I've seen it just in like regular life where, you know, women who are there with a man when he's got nothing and they help him build when he does get success, he often won't appreciate it. He very often will just toss her aside, you know, decide to like upgrade, so to speak. Not that I think that it would ever be an upgrade, because I think a woman who would do that deserves the world. Like a woman who's going to be there for somebody and help them grow, I think they deserve the world. So I don't think a man trading her in for somebody just like younger or something would be like an upgrade. I think he would be losing somebody that probably can't be upgraded. But unfortunately, a lot of these guys will think of it as like an upgrade, so to speak. The unfortunate reality is that most guys will never fully appreciate what women do and what women have to sacrifice and the work that women put into a man while he's building and growing, so that when he does reach his success, it is very rare that he will truly appreciate it. For a lot of these guys, their version of appreciation is just to keep that woman around so that she can kind of reap the benefits of, you know, maybe finances, or maybe even not. Like some guys won't even do that. Some guys will marry the woman and just keep her around and keep using her. Some guys, like in the Conor McGregor situation, won't even marry her, which, oh my God, how humiliating. I don't know if she's a good person or not. I have no idea. I don't really know Dee Devlin at all. No idea. She might be just as bad as he is. I have no idea. But the idea of a woman investing in a man, supporting a man when he was nothing, then like working with, like, it's my understanding she was working like with his team to help like his career. So she like technically is kind of like working for like his image and stuff like that. Part of the team that's making him who he is. And he won't even marry her. Like this kind of investment, 4 babies, and you know, all this time with him and how much she's invested in him, and he won't even marry her after all these years. That is just embarrassing. That is embarrassing. And for any guy who's gonna be like, oh, he's not gonna marry her because he knows he'd lose in divorce court or whatever, it's like, okay, but after everything she's done for him and everything she's invested in him, she's not gonna get anything back. Like, I mean, she probably would get child support, she should get a lot of child support. The fact that we're so hell-bent on men protecting their money and we're not actually focused on women who are putting their whole lives on the line for these guys, and we're not concerned with her and her safety, like, that's actually mind-boggling to me. And the fact that it's apparently public knowledge that he's been very unfaithful to her. And, you know, look, are people out there going to argue? Maybe they're polyamorous. Maybe it's an understanding that they sleep with other people, or he sleeps with other people, or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe. But I gotta be honest, the fact that he's so public about it, and, you know, if they had come forward and said, we have a polyamorous relationship or an open relationship or something like that or whatever, that's one thing. But the fact that he keeps apparently getting caught with other women, and the way he acts around other women when people know he's in a committed relationship or supposed to be a committed relationship, that's embarrassing for her. Like, that's just publicly humiliating her and publicly humiliating the mother of his kids and a woman who has dedicated her life essentially to supporting him in his career. And she's not even getting the title of wife. That might actually be better for her, because if she does decide to leave, it could be a clear, like, an easier break, and maybe that will benefit her if she does decide to leave. I don't know. Like, I don't know if she's complicit in this. I don't know if she's just, like, you know, okay with what he's doing because she just wants the lifestyle and the money and she's just gonna look the other way. I don't know. I don't know if it's because she's just invested so much of her time and money in this relationship that she just feels like leaving it would be throwing away, like, you know, a lifetime of investment. I don't know if it's like the bond from, you know, having children with him, which is very intense for most women. I don't know if maybe she doesn't feel safe. I mean, this guy does have a serious history of violence. It's possible she's scared to leave. I don't know. I don't know the answer to any of those things. It could be a combination of some of them. I don't know, but it's just such a sad situation. And I do know, I mean, again, my heart goes out to victims or potential victims of anybody that he has harmed in the past. You know, whether you believe any of the accusations or not, I don't think it's that big a stretch to say that he has hurt people in his personal life. I'm not just talking about like when he's, you know, being paid and two people are consenting to be in the ring and fight together. That's a different situation. But when we're talking about his violence in his personal life, my heart goes out to anybody that has been harmed in any situation. But my heart also goes out to Dee Devlin, his long-term girlfriend, because like for somebody with so much money and fame and so many of the perks in life, she does not look like a happy woman. She does not look like a woman who is doing well. I mean, again, she's beautiful. She's a beautiful woman. But there's something about, again, it's the difference. It's not necessarily an attractiveness, but there's a glow to a woman who's just like happy and in love, and Dee Devlin just doesn't have it. She's beautiful. Like, I'm not knocking her physical appearance at all. She's a beautiful woman, but I hope for the sake of her and particularly for her children, I hope for the best for them. And I absolutely hope for the best for any women who have been victims, whether we know about them or not. I mean, any SA situations at all. And that includes some instances. Apparently there was an instance where he punched an elderly man in a bar because he's mad at him. Like, I mean, again, any instance of this man's violence, which he obviously has trouble with his temper. Again, that doesn't make him an alpha. That doesn't make him more of a man who just can't control his temper and just decides to be violent against people that, you know, because he can't control his temper. That's not a masculine man. That's a grown child with grown man strength throwing a toddler temper tantrum. That's ego talking. You want to call it toxic masculinity, whatever it is you want to call it. That's not a safe man. And my heart goes out to anybody who's been the victim of that. I just scratched the surface of some of these things. There's a lot of misconceptions about SA and a lot of misconceptions about what makes a man masculine. And I have a lot of other videos talking about healthy versus unhealthy masculinity and masculine role models and things like that. So I encourage you to check out those videos. I just sort of scratch the surface of that in this video. Watching this stuff play out, and I also want to send some love to anybody out there who may themselves be a victim of violence or abuse or something like that, that is watching some of these stories play out in the news. That might be seeing, you know, women who are trying to come forward and who are just getting vilified in the media. And if that's bringing up something for you, my heart goes out to you. Please find someone to talk to. You know, you're worthy of healing. And I realize that a lot of this stuff can be very triggering for people when it comes up in the media. So my heart goes out to you. I just scratched the surface of some very heavy topics, but these were just things that were really coming up with this whole Conor McGregor court case and that I wanted to touch on. And I wish the system was better. I wish the system was better for helping people who are actual victims. And I really really hope that women especially pay attention to red flags in men, red flags with violence and things like that, so that you never as a woman end up in this situation. So my heart goes out to you. So thank you for watching this video. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you have any, thoughts on this video, please keep it respectful. But any thoughts on this video or any other video topic suggestions, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Any engagement on this channel helps really boost it in the algorithm, so more people can find this video and get these lessons, so we can get this message out there more. If you want to check out my guided journals, my Dark Feminine Energy guided journal and my Recovering Pick Me Girl guided journal, which they can actually both help you if you do find yourself in a very unhealthy relationship or drawn to very unhealthy men. It can really help you to connect to your feminine energy, but also be safe and connect to safety in your body and connect to your feminine power, which is so important. I also have courses, masterclasses, and all my links to my social media will all be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.